The Crossplane engine of the R1. This is the story of how Yamaha broke all the rules, of how they brought an engine straight from Valentino Rossi's garage to the street. Today, we are going to unravel the magic, the myth, and the engineering of the Crossplane engine. And I promise you that by the end, you will understand why this bike isn't just ridden, it is felt. But before we go any further, I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Now, let's get into what we came here to do. Life before the Crossplane. The Screamer. To understand why the 2009 Crossplane engine was such a seismic revolution, we first must look at the world that dominated before its arrival. The era of the Screamer. Since its spectacular debut in 1998, the Yamaha YZF R1 was not just a motorcycle, it was a statement of intent. Yamaha redefined the rules of the game with innovations like the first vertically stacked gearbox on a production bike. This stroke of genius from project leader Kunihiko Miwa allowed for a shorter engine, which in turn made room for a longer swing arm, drastically improving traction without sacrificing agility. Throughout the years, the R1 continued this path of relentless innovation. We saw the arrival of fuel injection in 2002, the brutal Delta Box 3 chassis, and the obsession with weight reduction that led to a 1-to-1 power-to-weight ratio in 2004. By 2007, the R1 was one of the most advanced machines on the planet, equipped with Yamaha chip-controlled throttle, YCCT, and Yamaha chip-controlled intake, YCCI. However, despite all this innovation, the heart of the R1, and that of all its Japanese rivals, including the Honda CBR, Suzuki GSX-R, and Kawasaki ZX-10 are beat with the same rhythm, that of the Screamer engine. The Screamer is the traditional inline-4 engine. Its magic and its flaw lie in its crankshaft, which is a flat plane type. The crank pins are arranged at 180 degrees, meaning the two outer pistons move up and down together, while the two inner ones do the opposite. This creates a perfectly symmetrical and constant firing order. The result is that high-pitched, symphonic howl, capable of reaching stratospheric revolutions and generating massive power figures. But it had a dirty secret, an inherent noise that even the most advanced electronics couldn't erase: inertial torque. Think of it like this. Combustion torque is the pure power from the explosions pushing the pistons down. It is the music you want to hear. Inertial torque, on the other hand, is the chaotic force generated by the actual mass of the pistons violently accelerating and decelerating thousands of times per minute. It is the static. In a Screamer, this static is so strong that it mixes with the music. The rider, when twisting the throttle, receives a dirty or filtered signal. It becomes incredibly difficult to feel the exact grip limit of the rear tire. This lack of pure connection caused sudden and unpredictable slides at the limit, a problem that Yamaha, obsessed with traction since 1998, could no longer ignore. They had reached the limit of what the Screamer could offer. The world of superbikes had become predictable, boring in its symmetrical perfection. Yamaha didn't need more power. It needed better power. It needed to silence the static. And the only way to do it was to break the Screamer engine and start from scratch. The magic of MotoGP. If the problem was the static of inertial torque muddying the rider's connection, the solution wasn't going to come from a conventional lab. It came from the most demanding place on the planet, the MotoGP circuit. Crossplane technology wasn't a 2009 invention. It was a direct transfer of race-proven technology. Yamaha had been using Crossplane engines in their YZR AM1 MotoGP machines since 2004 with resounding success. In fact, when legend Valentino Rossi joined Yamaha that same year, he was given a choice. Rossi tested the bike with the Crossplane engine and his choice was instant and decisive. He didn't choose it for its raw power. He chose it because it offered smoother throttle response and better rear tire traction. Rossi, the master of control at the limit, understood that to win he didn't need more horsepower. He needed to better feel what the rear wheel was doing. The Crossplane was developed for traction and rider confidence, and now Yamaha faced the challenge of bringing that magic to the street. But what exactly is the Crossplane? Its name reveals everything. In a traditional screamer engine, the crankshaft is flat plane. And if you look at it from one end, the 4 crank pins, where the connecting rods attach, form a straight line arranged at 180 degrees. The Crossplane, instead, has the crank pins arranged at 90-degree angles to each other. Viewed from the end, they form a perfect cross. This seemingly simple geometry radically changes the internal workings of the engine. Instead of the symmetrical and constant rhythm of the screamer, the Crossplane creates a completely asymmetrical pulse. Its firing order is an irregular sequence. This broken rhythm, similar to the Big Bang sequence of racing bikes, has 2 magical and immediate consequences. The first is the sound. By eliminating the even firing order, the high-pitched howl is gone. In its place, a deep guttural and mechanical roar is born, a sound that confuses the ears. It sounds more like a racing V4, like a Ducati or Aprilia, than a Japanese inline 4. The second, and most important, is the feeling. That irregular firing order and the movement of the pistons achieve the engineering feat of almost completely canceling out the chaotic inertial torque. The static disappears. The rider, for the first time, stops feeling the mechanical noise and feels almost exclusively the combustion torque, the pure force of the explosions. The connection between the right hand and the asphalt becomes telepathic. Finally, in 2009, advances in metallurgy allowed Yamaha to mass-produce this complex piece of engineering. They weren't just launching a new engine. They were putting the soul of Valentino Rossi's M1 into the hands of the public. This is how it feels. If the engineering of the Crossplane was the thesis, the riders' stories were the proof that it worked. When the 2009 R1 hit the streets, technical data and power specs took a back seat to the sensory experience. The Crossplane engine wasn't just ridden, it was felt. And that feeling started with the ears. The legend of the Crossplane R1 was forged in confusion. The world was used to the high-pitched, symmetrical howl of Japanese screamers. Then, this bike started up, and it didn't sound right. The most common anecdote in forums is one of bewilderment. Veteran owners recount how other bikers, and even mechanics, would approach them worried. "Are you sure that isn't a Ducati?" they would ask. Or worse, "Buddy, that engine doesn't sound right. It sounds like you're dropping a cylinder." That guttural, deep, and irregular sound, a direct product of its asymmetrical firing order, became its acoustic signature. It was the MotoGP roar that owners proudly fired up at bike meets, instantly setting them apart from their rivals. But that sound was just the prologue to the real story. Traction. This is where the technical became pure emotion. The purpose of the Crossplane was to allow the rider to feel pure combustion. And the anecdotes confirm that Yamaha nailed it. Riders, both rookies and experts, started using a phrase in track day forums: godly confidence. The stories of track improvement are countless. Riders relay how, suddenly, their lap times improved drastically. It wasn't because the R1 had more horsepower. Often, rivals like the CBR or the ZX-10 are put up higher numbers on the dyno, but because that godly confidence allowed them to do what was previously unthinkable: get on the gas much earlier and more aggressively coming out of corners. Riders describe the feeling of the rear tire being hooked up to the asphalt, of being able to feel every individual pulse of power. This telepathic connection between the grip and the pavement is the soul of the bike. Of course, No legend is complete without its cost. Bringing a MotoGP engine to the street had consequences. The most shared anecdote by owners, especially of the 2009 to 2014 models, is the infernal heat. Jokes about feeling like your legs are cooking in heavy traffic are a rite of passage. It wasn't a defect, it was the price to pay for having such a visceral character. In the end, the legend of the Crossplane R1 isn't found in a soup of data. It's found in that unique mix. The torque feel of a V-twin and the top-end rush of an inline-4. It is a machine with a soul forged in competition, and that connection is what made it an icon. The CP philosophy, the impact of the 2009 CP4 Crossplane engine, was so profound that Yamaha found itself at a crossroads. Could they afford to let this incredible feeling of connection, traction, and character remain only on an elite superbike, inaccessible to most? The answer was a resounding no. They realized they hadn't just invented an engine. They had discovered a philosophy. This is the true legacy of the Crossplane, and the reason why it matters today, even if you've never swung a leg over an R1. Yamaha took the DNA of the CP4, that irregular pulse that cleaned up the connection, that linear and addictive torque delivery, and democratized it. This is where the story becomes relevant for almost every rider. Yamaha adapted the CP philosophy Crossplane to completely new engine architectures, and with it, changed the market forever. First, the CP3 was born, the three-cylinder engine that powers the acclaimed MT-09 series. It's not a peaky screamer or a lazy twin. It's a torque monster with a unique wail, all derived from that same philosophy of irregular firing intervals that prioritize character. But the masterstroke, the one that redefined the middleweight class, was the CP2, this parallel twin which today is the heart of the MT-07, the Tenere 700, and the R7 is perhaps the most beloved engine of the last decade. Why? Why does it feel so alive, so playful, and with so much traction compared to its rivals? It's the Crossplane philosophy. Its 270-degree crank perfectly mimics the pulse and power delivery of a 90-degree V-twin engine, giving it an explosive character and eliminating boring vibrations. That is the true legacy. The Crossplane R1 didn't just redefine the superbike, it gave birth to the masters of torque, empty range. Yamaha stopped competing only in the horsepower war and started winning the character war. If you own an MT-07 today, you are riding a machine whose emotional DNA was forged directly in the MotoGP R1. While the R1 continues to evolve, with its winglet and Brembo brake updates for 2025, its greatest impact is no longer just on the track. It's in the garages of millions of riders who discovered that a bike doesn't need 200 horsepower to be exciting. The legacy of the Crossplane is proof that, in motorcycling, engineering that prioritizes feel over pure numbers will always win. But now I want to hear from you. Are you Team Crossplane? Or do you prefer the pure, high-pitched howl of a screamer? Which engine, in your opinion, has the most character in history? Let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed these interesting facts, hit subscribe, because next time we'll be back to talk about riding techniques every professional should know, especially in the rain. Thanks for riding with us. See you in the next video.